Hey all, this is Nick, and this is the first episode of Mint Fox Talks. Before we get started, just a quick disclaimer type thing. If my speech seems a little stilted in the presentation, just remember that I am visually impaired, and I was reading the each slide, so so it takes me a little while to read each of those because I'm using enlargement software on the computer, so it kind of took me a while to keep up, and sometimes I got lost in a few places. I tried to rehearse each of the slides to try to minimize that, but it kind of there's only so much I can do, so just keep that in mind, and yeah, so anyway, without further ado, I hope you enjoy the presentation. Trans 101. Transgender, also shortened to trans or trans with an asterisk. This is an umbrella term that covers a wide range of people who have a different gender identity than what they were assigned at birth based on their genitalia. There are many different subgroups under the transgender umbrella, and the term keeps growing to accommodate each unique identity. Some of these identities are, but not limited to, trans women and trans men, sometimes referred to as transsexuals, though this term has become somewhat out of date, and some in the transgender community find it offensive because they see it as unsuitable of a term for such a broad range of identities, even in a binary gender transition, while others will identify as a transsexual. I'll go over etiquette concerning this sort of controversy more later. Non-binary identities such as gender fluid, third gender, gender queer, two-spirit, gender neutral, and many more. Cisgender. This term is literally the opposite of transgender. A cisgender person is someone whose gender identity matches their birth sex that they were assigned with at birth. There is some controversy whether this term is derogatory or not. Though some in the transgender community sadly do use it that way, the term is no more than the opposite label of transgender. Gender identity. One's personal experience of one's own gender. This is usually described as an internal sense of being a specific gender, be it man, woman, both, or neither. Note, gender identity and sexuality are two different things. Never assume. Gender expression. One's outward presentation and behaviors. Most societies have gender roles and norms that set the precedents for how we perceive what is masculine and feminine, setting the standards for how someone of a specific gender is generally supposed to outwardly present themselves to conform to society. Gender expression can be an outward expression of a person's inward gender identity, but not always. Again, never assume. Individuals can be more comfortable with a gender expression that doesn't necessarily match their gender identity. Sexual orientation. Most people are familiar with what this term means, but a lot of people tend to lump sexual orientation and gender identity together. I have it here to explain the difference and that they are separate. Sexual orientation is who you love, and gender identity is who you are. Intersex. This term refers to people who are born with characteristics of both sexes. The genitalia can be varying degrees of ambiguity. They can also have combinations of chromosomal genotypes, and sexual phenotypes, other than XY male and XX female. Until more recently, it was a regular practice to surgically and hormonally alter intersex infants and children to be more socially normal. Even today, some doctors will counsel patients to do this, but it's more controversial now, and there is growing evidence that it's better to wait to alter anything unless it's absolutely medically necessary. For example, the patient can't urinate. Because the alterations that many intersex individuals are put through as infants or children are done before they are able to voice their gender identity, the alterations aren't always done towards the sex that matches the person's gender identity. Many intersex individuals fall under the transgender umbrella because they seek to transition to what matches their gender identity. Transition. This is exactly what it sounds like, a transition from one gender to another, or somewhere in between, and or neither. There are two types of transition, social and medical. Not all transgender individuals feel the need or are physically able to do both a social and medical transition. Each transgender person is different in which medical interventions are right for them in their transition. Dysphoria, the opposite of euphoria. Dictionary definition: a state of dissatisfaction, anxiety, restlessness, or fidgeting. Here we're talking specifically about gender dysphoria, which is, in a nutshell, the dissatisfaction and anxiety of having a gender identity that does not match your biological sex. Each transgender person experiences gender dysphoria differently. For some, it's social dysphoria. For example, when someone calls them their birth name instead of their chosen name, or if someone calls them by the wrong pronoun. For others, it's physical dysphoria. For example, a trans man who hasn't had top surgery yet, having severe anxiety and worrying that if he doesn't bind his chest, he won't present as male effectively. For most transgender individuals, when the source of their dysphoria is addressed through social or medical intervention, this dysphoria either diminishes greatly or is relieved altogether. Basic etiquette. It seems like a silly thing to have to add, but members of the transgender community are often treated like second-class citizens, or as if they're another species and not worthy of respect and decency afforded to other human beings. This speaks to a need for education on how to treat transgender individuals with the same respect you would give anyone else. Always use a person's preferred name. It can cause great anxiety and depression for people to use a transgender individual's birth name. Rare exceptions may apply, but this is a fairly common one for trans people. Always use a person's preferred pronouns for the same reason as using their preferred name. It can cause great levels of anxiety to hear the wrong pronouns. This is not true for every trans person, but it is a sign of respect, and you prevent someone from possibly having high levels of anxiety. Accidents understandably happen with either name or pronouns, especially if you've known the transgender person pre-transition. As long as you genuinely apologize and correct the mistake without making a scene out of it, we know you're trying and you respect us enough to do so. Never use it, she-male, or tranny to refer to a transgender person. These terms are derogatory and are equivalent to other minorities' derogatory words that should not be said. Though some transgender individuals are okay with answering questions about their transition, most of the time it's an extremely personal and private matter. Talking about one's transition can cause a mixture of emotions that are hard to share with just anyone. If a person says they don't want to answer your questions, don't persist. They are not personally responsible for sating your curiosity nor educating you. Do not ask about surgeries a transgender individual may or may not have had. Again, not only is it a very private matter, but not every transgender person requires or is able to medically transition. Asking about surgeries that may not apply to an individual's transition or are out of reach because of medical and or financial reasons could be irritating at best and depressing at worst. For example, suppose a transgender person is unable to have most or all of the procedures they wish to have because of a bleeding disorder. Questions like, "So, have you had surgery yet?" would be a depressing reminder of what they might never have. Also, remember, many of the surgeries for a medical transition involve private parts. If somebody suddenly started asking you about your genitals, would you answer them? Final thoughts. Transgender individuals just want to be seen as a normal part of the community instead of outcasts. It's not that we want people to learn new terms and ways of doing things so we can be special. Honestly, if people slow down, think, and respect other people, then learning new things isn't really necessary. Calling somebody by their preferred name or pronoun doesn't take learning new terminology, just love, respect, and decency. Of course, knowing the terminology can help you navigate the boundless amount of misinformation out there, but respect is the key. As long as you treat people in the transgender community with genuine respect, you'll get respect in return. Next up on Mint Fox Talks, we will have an episode on kind of a similar 101 type episode on visual impairment. Unfortunately, it won't be quite as presentation-like, quite as nicely arranged as this one was, because my trial subscription of PowerPoint ended, so I'll have to do it in a different fashion, but hopefully it'll be at least halfway decent. And after that, I will be doing a kind of a my story so far, so you can kind of get up to date where I'm at in my transition, and kind of my story on my visual impairment, what my visual impairment condition is, and kind of a little bit about that and how it affects my transition and my daily life and some of that sort of stuff. So those are a couple of videos that are going to be coming up, and hopefully not too long after that I'll be doing a video about my upcoming trip to Portland, so stay tuned.